famille. Que la famille.
So I'm going to talk a bit today about the mission-driven startup. I'm not really going to go into like detail of growth hacking tips, as way better people than me that talk about that kind of stuff these days. I've got a few videos on that on YouTube if you want to go find that. What I'm going to talk through a bit more is kind of how we've done it at TransferWise. So specifically, how building a culture around your cause creates a product that kind of grows itself, which is kind of like a pretty seductive idea, to build a product that's so good that it grows itself. But first introductions, I'm Nilan. I'm Vice President Growth at TransferWise. That means I'm responsible for product and marketing. I've been at TransferWise full-time for 2.5 years. Prior to that, for the last 5-6 years, I've been a startup advisor on growth, working with VCs and private equity companies in the UK. I've been advising TransferWise since the very beginning, since it was Tarvet and Christo. I think up till 2 years ago, I was pretty sure TransferWise was going to fail. And it's very cool to see us succeed. And I'll talk a little bit through how we made it through the death zone and to kind of where we are today. So just a bit about TransferWise, just for context. So we're the leader in international money transfer. We're moving $500 million every month. We're doubling in size every 2 to 3 months. When I joined 2.5 years ago, we were moving $500,000 a month. So it was $500,000 to $500 million in about 2.5 years. And we went from 60 to 500 people, which was a hell of a journey. So why talk about this, the mission-driven startup? Why talk about it now? And why, when I get invited a bit to talk in public, this is the kind of thing I talk about. So I strongly believe in iterating your ideas and your thoughts in public. And this is definitely our biggest challenge at the moment. As we went into the beginning of this year, and I looked at the team, I think half of the team, so 250 people, had been with us for only 6 months. And one of the biggest risks we faced is that we lose the reason why we do what we do. And when you lose that, your customers eventually stop believing in you, you lose traction on product, and eventually you die. So to try to push the organization very strongly in the right direction at the beginning of the year, we came up with this concept of a mission-driven startup as the reason and our cause that motivates what we do. So I started off by writing a blog post about it. But what is one anyway? So what I'm going to do now is, for the rest of the presentation, kind of take you through like what it means, a mission-driven startup, talk through how that impacts your growth strategy, touch a little on values and how they work, move on a bit to talk about our culture and how we operate, talk a little bit about the outcomes, where we end up, and also talk about the downsides of operating in this way. So it's about, I think, 62 slides, doing about 1 a minute, okay? So starting with definitions. So all startups start by solving a problem. All great startups start by solving usually their founder's problem. And with Tarvet and Christo, so we have a founding story, kind of like a mythical founding story, which is true. Every startup's got a great founding story. So our one is Tarvet was based in Estonia, and he was paying his mortgage in London. And each time he sent like £1,000 through, the bank took £50, okay? Each time he transferred as a fee. And Christo was living in London and sending savings back to Estonia, about £1,000. And each time he did that, the banks took a £50 fee. So they met each other at a party, and they started complaining about this. And then they thought, instead of us sending money and losing it each time to the bank, why don't I pay your mortgage and you put money into my savings account? That way, no money moves internationally, there's no fee, and we save £50 each, which is pretty cool. So they did that. And it was such a good idea. So that was the first version of TransferWise. Okay? No code, proper MVP, 100% value. So then it was such a good idea, they thought, let's do the second version of TransferWise, which was a Skype chat. So they invited all their Estonian friends and British friends to a chat and said, hey, who wants to send money to the UK and who wants to send money to Estonia? And they matched up everyone going in different directions. And that was the second version of TransferWise. So that worked really well. Eventually, it kind of got to the point that one weekend, Christo pulled together the website, which is just a form, and enabled other people in the public to request transfers heading in different directions. And so today we're live with bank accounts in over 70 countries and live on over 300 routes. The product's a little bit more complex than that these days, but it's still fundamentally the same solution to the problem. So all startups start by solving the problem, but for me, the difference with a mission-driven startup is when you have a cause. So for us, our cause was that, this is one of the frightening things about working at TransferWise. So I realized probably about 2 years ago that a bank could start TransferWise tomorrow. In fact, a bank could start TransferWise at any point in the last 200 years. They've just chosen not to do so. And so taking a step back, our cause was that there's a problem in the world that needs to be solved. That's kind of similar to most startups. But if we weren't a catalyst for change, the world would not change. And we describe very much what we're trying to do as creating an irrevocable change in the world, where money can move instantly for a fraction of the cost than it does today. If you were to add up like all the bank fees that go in international exchange, HSBC I think took 800 million in international exchange fees last year. If you add up all those fees and you convert that into global GDP, that total cost is equivalent to every single person on the earth working for 2 days. Okay? So if you manage to squash that all the way down, that's a huge efficiency gain. That we kind of believe wouldn't happen if we didn't start it going. So, I'm kind of defining a mission-driven startup that's passionate as the change in the world that it wants to make happen, and profitability, revenue, shareholder optimization, all that kind of stuff is just a means to an end. So I was being interviewed by the BBC a month ago, and I was off talking about all this stuff, and the journalist looked at me and he said, "That's just marketing bullshit." He goes, "Prove it." So it was actually cool because I could think of a few examples of things that kind of proved it. So I'll flick through a few of them. So one was we lobbied the government in the UK to make it illegal for banks to hide fees in the exchange rates. So I think it's 80% of the UK, and I think it's about 70% of Europe, aren't aware that when you move money internationally, the banks take a fee, usually about 5 to 10%, in the exchange rate, so in the spread. It's called a hidden fee. So we've been working with the UK government and to make that illegal and to pass legislation that banks need to be transparent about their fees. So in some sense that does help us commercially, but in a broader sense it kind of helps everyone. We're very humbled when David Cameron made it a manifesto pledge for the Conservative Party, and so now we're working with him to make it law. This is a second example. It was Project Robin Hood. So we have an insane PR director who I think is coming out to visit you guys in a few days, and it was her idea. And she came up with this idea that we should give people's money back if they've lost a lot of money from a bank. So they've done an exchange and they've lost, say, £1,000 in the fee. So we found somebody who that happened to, and she said we should fix that. So from a commercial perspective, it made absolutely no sense, but we ran it for a while. It didn't really make that much of a difference to our customers, so we stopped. But it's just more the fact that we did it kind of was an example of proving that it's something we care about. And the final example is that banks run TransferWise now. So two banks, LHV in Estonia and number 26 in Germany, use TransferWise for their money transfers. But more than that, we actually work with banks to try to get them to lower fees for their customers, irrespective of whether they use TransferWise or not. So those are kind of current examples of what being mission-driven means. And why do we need to go to such extremes? I think for me, it's because it's just because of the state of where trust is with the financial system at the moment. That if you're trying to innovate and to build trust in fintech, you have to go all the way out there to prove that you're different and you're not trying to build another bank and trying to build a system again that's failed customers in so many ways. Okay, so now on to something a bit more practical. How does this manifest itself in terms of growth? So very interestingly, the biggest driver of our growth is something that we call evangelism. So 60% of the customers who joined TransferWise last month found out about TransferWise from a friend. 30% was through performance marketing, and the remainder through brand marketing. If I go back to a year and a half ago, only 30% of customers found out about TransferWise from a friend. So this concept of like building a business through strong word of mouth growth and then taking a step back and trying to figure out how do you optimize your product to drive word of mouth and how do you optimize your marketing to drive word of mouth is a pretty neat problem to solve. I've spent some time with the guys at Uber and Airbnb, and they've definitely figured a lot of stuff out, but I've yet to meet someone who's kind of really systemized word of mouth growth and evangelism, and that's definitely something that we're trying to do. In fact, we go so far as to say that we can actually create it. We try to optimize our products and our experiences to create that, and we even have our marketing strategy doesn't drive purely on directly attributable new users. We also look to see what's the amplification it does for the existing messages our customers are telling their friends in the market. So why do people recommend TransferWise? So this is where it all comes down from. What really drives recommendation? We ask our customers this regularly and try to understand and learn what are the drivers of recommendation and try to systemize it by putting teams around them. So through talking to customers, I'll share with you what we've learned so far. So people recommend our product or a product for two broad sets of reasons: rational reasons and emotional reasons. On the rational side, they're always talking about the product. On the emotional side, they're talking about what you stand for or your brand. Something I believe is that all products have got parameters, hard edges around them that you can measure. And you kind of hear this when you hear customers talking about your product. So you've got to use TransferWise because it's really fast. You've got to use TransferWise because it's really cheap. You've got to use TransferWise because it's really easy to use. So those are our product parameters: speed, price, convenience, and coverage. Are we live on a corridor or not? You can put KPIs and measure those things. You can measure price, you can measure speed, you can even measure convenience. What we've seen is, in order to get to advocacy, you need to be an order of magnitude better than the alternative. So banks charge 5% in the UK. If we charged 4.8%, we might get a customer, but you wouldn't tell your mum. But banks charge 5, we charge 0.5. So if you're transferring €1,000, you save €50 each time. You do that 4 times, you've got €200, you go on holiday. And you're going on holiday not because of TransferWise, you're going on holiday because your bank was stealing from you previously. And you tell your friends about it because you're upset about it. And that's talkable. With speed, 90% of our transfers happen within a day, 60% within an hour. And we're live as well with instant transfers, where the money turns up in your account faster than you get the email. But we do these things like not as a clever way to grow. We do it because we kind of believe the world should be that way. And I think that authenticity is what our customers see in our brand. But it wasn't always like this. So I'll talk you through the early days. So for our first 2 years, we didn't grow. We had 100 customers a month, every month. And we weren't going anywhere. And we had the same product. So the product hadn't changed. It was still as fast. It wasn't quite as fast, but it was definitely as cheap as it is today. So our learning was product isn't enough, right? Marketing does matter. Our first head of marketing, he kind of came up with this insight that our customers don't talk about money transfer in the pub. So we actually need to give our customers stories to tell. And at first it was very much angry young startups swearing in our ads or doing crazy stunts. We kind of like went through this period of doing a stunt every 3 to 6 months. This was when we and our customers went to the Bank of England, and we had a flash mob stripping in the name of transparency. This was huge for us. But this was very much, and I imagine a lot of people in the audience are at this stage, when you're desperate for cut through and just pushing and pushing to see what would work. You don't have much cash. But what we found was that people were super interested and super passionate about talking about what we stood for, our cause. We kind of spotted this around the point in time, which was September, year before last, when we rebranded to this flag symbol. At that time, we sent this email out to our customers. So there's no discount in it, there's no promotion, there's no nudity. It just talks about the world that we're trying to build. We acquired more customers from people forwarding that email on than anything we'd ever done previously. And it kind of gave us the confidence to start pushing much harder with our customer base and talking about the world we were trying to build as a reason for them using us and as a reason for them sharing with their friends about TransferWise. So building like a learning organization around marketing, trying to figure out what is the reason why someone will talk about TransferWise, why will they care, and how do you infect them with our cause, is very much how a marketing organization works in our mission-driven startup. I'm going to move on a bit now just to talk through how this scales from the people side and how we operate. So mission-driven culture, what's that? It's how you kind of, I guess, inspire people with the mission. So we operate in a very unorthodox way. So most startups I know, like, they start off with a founder. How many founders in the room? Awesome. So founders having a vision from God. That's how it starts, right? So I always describe, like, if you've spotted something that everyone thinks is completely insane and it's such a huge change from the status quo that everyone thinks you're mad, that means you're highly likely you're going to unlock a huge amount of value. Okay. But to do that, no one's going to listen to you, no one's going to believe you, so you kind of become this micromanaging, autocratic founder. And I see many successful founders that kind of get to Series A through operating in that way. But they kind of fail at that point because you can't build a team if you operate like that, and you can't scale beyond yourself. This is our philosophy on people and product. So Christo, one of the founders, says, product is people. So every single person in TransferWise works on the experience and touches our customers in some way, and therefore every single person can impact growth. But the product we build is an outcome of the people we hire and the decisions they choose to take. The most I can do, or the founders can do, is try to influence the culture, their basis for decision making, and try very hard not to make decisions and to tell them what to do. So how does that work in practice? So we work in something called autonomous independent teams. Each team is focused on a growth KPI. That KPI makes a difference to our customers and impacts our growth. It's kind of similar to the Spotify tribe model. Valve work in a similar way as well. We kind of figured it out as we went along. I don't think our method is necessarily as well thought out as those guys, but I'll share with you the bits that we've figured out so far. So I'm going to take a team, the currencies team. So the currencies team launches a new currency, okay? And it is autonomous and independent. So what does that mean? That means that the currencies team, no one tells the team what to do. So every quarter, the currencies team sits down together and says, next quarter, we're going to launch these 16 currencies. We don't have like a VP strategy who sits there and tries to figure that out. The team figures it out. And the team then launches those currencies and talks through with the rest of the team how it's doing in terms of progress. So that model works like it's based on the assumption that the people you hire are intelligent. Okay, it doesn't work if you haven't got clever people in the team that you can empower. You need to trust them. You need to know that they're going to be trying to move it forward, and those teams need to be independent. The moment you've got like a central team that you need to prioritize, then you need to have someone sitting on top of the prioritization. So one thing we found we had to do was to put everything you needed to launch a currency into that team. So product managers, engineers, ex-bankers, compliance folk. So this is a much simplified org chart. We have about 35 teams today in a crazy matrix, but this is kind of how we were running probably about 2 years ago when we moved to this model. So we had a currencies team that launched currencies, KPI, number of new users from currencies launched. An operations team picks up money in one country, pays it out in another country. 99% of the world's banks don't have APIs. So that team has got a lot of human people in it that actually are doing physical uploads of money as well. So the KPIs for that team are speed and cost. A team on the verification process, a team on conversion, KPI conversion rate, a team on the experience, a team on viral growth, so a team on like how many people do you tell about TransferWise, trying to move the viral coefficient, a team on marketing. And so each team with their own KPIs trying to move forward towards a broader vision. So I'm going to talk through like just a very quick example of how that works in practice. So we've got great values that kind of underpin how we operate. They're cool. I'm just going to dive into one, which is customers are more important than the team, are more important than your ego. So I'm going to just take you through just briefly, so one of the most common questions I get asked is, what happens when teams disagree, and how do you kind of resolve that? So we practice something called weak product ownership. So every single part of the product is owned. So the conversion team will own the transfer flow, the marketing team will own the marketing and the homepage, etc. But crucially, any team can change any other part of the product. If the viral team think we can really move the viral coefficient by changing the flow someone goes through when they're doing their first money transfer, they can issue a pull request to the team that own it and make the change. Which is quite a novel idea. Now, where this idea came from is from what I call the great Mexican standoff between product and marketing. So the last 3 startups I've been involved with, I kind of got tired of the marketing team saying, well, we can't grow because the product's fucked, or the product team saying, we can't grow because the marketing's really screwy. So the solution was to take a product engineering team and put it into marketing and tell the marketing team, you can change anything in the product. When I say this at product conferences, they just look really scared. It's quite funny. But it works, right? So as long as you're targeting still new users and the guys can attribute the changes they're making to new user growth, this is the kind of thing that enables our performance marketing team. So I think 70% of our volume in performance marketing comes from Facebook. And so the performance marketing team wants to do Facebook logins, FacePals on the landing page, integrate tightly with the Facebook SDK on the mobile app. If we had a central engineering team, they take a ticket and wait in line for that. Or figure out how to manage the internal politics to move that forward. Now, they just have engineers and they get to do it. And then it's quite funny, they stop having excuses. And it's really cool, actually. On the marketing side, especially for things like SEO, it makes a huge difference having an engineering team within marketing. So what happens when you have disagreements? So what I normally say is teams take a step backwards and think about the customer behind their KPI. And I said this at a conference in Zurich, what was this, about 3 or 4 months ago. And a guy sat me down and said, that's bullshit. Because when I look at your account page, I can see the invite team saying invite money at the top of the page, the request money team saying click here. I can see it's like warfare between your teams on that page. So that's definitely one of the challenges that we're working through at the moment. And so what we did was tried very hard not to make a decision and not to me kind of design the account page or to arbitrate. What happened was we have a very strong design director who kind of took the product teams away to a session of user testing, which is what this looks like. And the teams that were trying to hit that page all sat down and watched customers try to make their way through money transfers. And it became very obvious what the point of that page was and whether people really wanted to invite friends at this point in time or request money. And they understood at this point in the flow what was the user's goal. And that really actually helped our teams see behind their KPIs to the customers behind them. Just going to wrap up just by talking just briefly through some of the metrics we use. So we use Slack. We have 2 channels in Slack, which are our most popular channels. One is the Happy Customers channel. So every time anyone has a correspondent, usually in customer support, but from anywhere, with a customer, and they're happy, we drop it in the Happy Customers channel. If they're unhappy, we drop it in the Unhappy Customers channel, and kind of tag the engineers who are responsible for it. This is quite a funny one. This is someone who's gone through verification where legally we need to be checking who they are, who they say they are, but they're desperate for their transfer. It's definitely something, though, to log in every day and just to read through that feed and see the opportunities we've got to improve the product and therefore the opportunities to grow faster. The other big metric that underpins everything we do is Net Promoter Score. How many here have heard of Net Promoter Score? Cool, all the marketing folk in the room, awesome. So just very briefly, this is a question that you may see asked quite often as you're using a product. Would you recommend us to your friends? We've kind of been asking this question systemically for about 4 years. And there's a scale between 0 and 10. People that give you a 9 or a 10, you assume are promoters. So they go around telling everyone, you've got to use TransferWise. 1s to 6s, they're kind of detractors. And 7s and 8s, they're kind of like, meh, didn't really do it for me. So what I say, you can calculate it as a percentage by taking the detractors away from promoters and working it out. So it's quite cool. It's an industry benchmark. So the travel industry's Net Promoter Score is 0, which makes me laugh. I used to work in travel. Expedia's is 30%. Google's is, I think, it's about 70%. Apple's 67%. Ours is 80%. Now, why optimize for this metric? So you can build a startup that you're optimizing for revenue growth. You can build a startup that you're focusing on conversion rate growth. If you focus on recommendation growth and increasing the virality coefficient, so how many people tell their friends, then you will have 1 customer who will tell 2 customers, who will tell 4 customers, and you will keep growing. So figuring out how to make changes in your product that lead to greater recommendation has a much greater impact on growth than figuring out changing the button color from blue to green, if that makes sense. And if you optimize your product organization and your culture to make big changes that drive growth, it has a massive impact. And what we've observed is when somebody moves from giving us a 6 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10, they double the number of people they tell about TransferWise. A 7 to 8, they double again. An 8 to 9, they double again. A 9 to 10, they double again. But this isn't easy. So if you think about it, if you're starting out with a startup, you just about get it to work, and then you start ironing out the issues, and then you start optimizing it. But if you want to optimize for recommendation, you've really got to try and get the team to care about blowing your customers' socks off. And so that's Net Promoter Score. So you can kind of understand, like, just at very high level, I've gone very fast through this, how, like, centering the organization on customers, figuring out how to instrument recommendation, the drivers of recommendation, putting teams behind each of those KPIs, turning the teams into kind of learning organizations, trying to figure out, if we do this, does that make a difference to our customers and our growth or not? That leads to this kind of word-of-mouth driven growth. And if it's grounded very much in your cause, then you've got a further amplification of why people talk about you. So just in closing, I thought I'd just share some of the downsides of operating this way. So the things you lose when you operate this way are the things organizations typically prioritize. So you lose consistency. Each team runs in a different way. Our brand was all over the place. I know UX was. It's slowly getting aligned. But it's much harder to be consistent operating in this way. You lose efficiency because the same problem gets figured out in multiple places. You lose singularity of vision. So no one's got a single vision of where we're going. It's kind of very organic. And sometimes if you need to move very, very fast, chatting to Ben Horowitz, who's on our board, for him, the major downside of this is if we had to move incredibly quickly, it's quite hard to move the whole organization very fast. We don't have the muscle for doing that you normally find in most corporations. But what we get on the flip side is we get ownership. So ownership like I've never seen. So teams really, really care about what they're doing. You get speed and agility as well. And where you end up, if you kind of follow that through, is kind of this potential to make an irreversible change in the world, as I said, where money moves instantly for almost zero cost. Cool. Okay, that's me done. I think we have a bit of time for questions.
Hi.
Hey.
My name is Nikhil, and I use TransferWise. It's a great product.
Awesome. Any feedback?
Yes, I have recommended the product actually to quite a few people.
Good.
So I love your the onboarding, which is very clear in the sense that it shows the customer where the banks actually charge that excess fees and how you're better than the banks. And I think that was also a part of a talk that you gave. I think somebody from TransferWise actually gave it to the Anderson Horowitz team when there was a talk in London. My question is, you spoke about, you told us that, well, it was mostly through recommendations that your growth pretty much sparked. I'd like to know, what was the single largest change that you made in your product as such? Because you have a strong product.
Yeah.
What was the product change that you made that really surprised you in the sense that you didn't think that it would result in a large change, but it did?
Yeah. In fact. So the single thing that I recommend everyone to do is to launch a refer a friend program. So that was it, right? But if you launch a refer a friend program and your NPS is 10%, it goes nowhere. So you need to measure whether your people are actually referring your product, and then if you've got a strong net promoter score and you drop a refer a friend program, it grows like wildfire. And to give you a feel for that, I'll share with you some numbers. So 80% of our customers say they told a friend about TransferWise last month for no money. And those customers that come in on pure word of mouth are like about 40% of the customers that came in last month. Something like 5% of our customers use the invite a friend scheme, where we have a bunch of different incentives you kind of get depending on the program you're in. So, but that 5% brought in 20% of the customers. So I call that, and you'll find this with your products, they're kind of revolutionaries that care about what you're doing, and then they're mercenaries that are in it for the money. But that definitely helps us massively in early stage markets as well.
Hi, Nicholas. I saw some of your ads in London, but I didn't really understand the product, and now that I've seen it, I think it's really cool.
That's really good feedback on our ads, thanks.
I had a question. Are there any large, significant countries in which you've had problems for legal or economic reasons having your product be available?
Yeah, we're live now in China and Russia and India, which were some of the hardest. But the hard problem actually is that we do not have a globally scalable product. So we really found this when we went to the US. So payments are local, so in France, you like using carte bleue. In Germany, they want to pay with Lastschrift. In America, they don't know how to do a wire transfer. And our product's built on wire transfers. And they don't know how to do a wire transfer, not because they're stupid, it's because their banks really don't know how to do a wire transfer. So when we launched in the US, our NPS was like 30%, and we weren't growing. So we had to build a brand new product for the US market that used a completely different paying method to get it to work. So every market has its own challenges like that we need to work through. Some of them very, very difficult, some of them much easier.
You talked about mission-driven trade-offs for teams, and maybe I missed it, but can you give an example?
Of what, sorry?
Of mission-driven trade-offs. Like what would be something you would, like what would be the incentive, or how do you manage that?
At a team-by-team basis?
Yes.
Cool, got it, yeah. So, it's an interesting one. So we talk about it as each of our teams needs to have a vision. The vision should be something our customers care about, and it should be multi-year. So the the currencies team vision is to get us live in every single country in the world. Okay. The processing team's vision, and they have like milestones in this now by quarter, is to make payments happen instantly for almost zero cost. And so they're constantly trying to move that down. The virality team's mission they talk about is to give everybody a reason and a way to tell their friends about TransferWise. And they have targets for how they're planning on moving the virality coefficient. The Buzz team's vision, the Buzz is part of our marketing teams. With their marketing, the way they think about it is that they want our customers to feel proud when they see the marketing. And they want non-customers to think, I want to be part of that organization. And they try to measure whether they're doing that and the impact on that on our growth. Cool. I think one more question.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Being a French Morocco born and bred student, I'm just having this question about legislation, because I know that the work you do is usually done by banks.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, how did you tackle the legal problem with your startup?
So legislation or banks? What do you mean?
Well, I mean legislation on transfer, on currencies transfer.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're legal, so we're not illegal. So every country we operate in has its own laws around anti-money laundering, for example, which means, and as a consequence, banks build up these checks to verify you are who you say you are, and you're not like a terrorist, and you're sending money to somebody who's also a verified individual. Now, the fun thing about this is the way in which banks have done this is they kind of get you to walk into a bank with like your passport and like loads of paperwork to verify who you say you are. But when you like read the law, it doesn't say that at all. So we actually work with the government and the EU to help them think through how to update the law for the 21st century, where my passport has got an NFC chip inside it. If I have an Android phone, I can take a picture of my passport, I can hold it next to the chip, and I can verify myself, and a picture of myself, and I can verify myself in a way my bank doesn't verify myself today. And so we work with regulators to understand where the regulation is today, and then we constantly push to make the experience better for our customers. And that's the bit that's kind of missing very much from the industry today. And that's the kind of role we play. Cool. Well, thanks very much for your time. I hope it was useful.
Que la famille.